And just give me a couple seconds till we are live. I will announce it and pass the floor to the moderator. Welcome, dear participants, to this fifth session. Just a quick logistic note. You will be able to access interpretation services during these sessions in both English, French, and Spanish. So please, you will select this by clicking on the interpretation section between the Q&A function and the more. It's located on the bottom of your screen, and then you'll be able to just select one of the three languages in which you want to listen to the webinar. This will be remaining the same throughout the duration of. I'm just here to give this note and pass the floor to our moderator for the session, Mr. Borhain Chakrun, who will be leading today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. Bonjour, buenos dias. Thank you very much for joining us to this very important meeting that we will be covering quite important issues that we think are at the center of the recovery. Welcome to this learning event on tools and lessons to recover, secure and sustainable development goal momentum. We will have live interpretation, as was mentioned earlier, in French and Spanish, as well as English, of course. Honorable ambassadors, participants, their colleagues, the COVID-19 pandemic threatens the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. We see it in the different areas of the SDGs. We see quite clear evidence that the COVID has exacerbated poverty and inequalities, putting pressure on all human rights and the democratic structure of our societies. It threatens into deepening the inequalities within and across countries. But there are hopes, and the pandemic also provides an opportunity to rethink the path ahead and address systemic injustice that we have within and across countries in our societies. It is clear that returning to business as usual is not an option, and we need to build back better, to build back differently, and to build back in a way that we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals that remain our compass. And as the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has pointed out, that the 2030 Agenda, underpinned by human rights, provides a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable recovery from the pandemic. So the recovery must be transformational, holistic, just, inclusive, but it's also a human right-based recovery and a human-centered recovery. So today we will contribute to the unpacking this concept of a sustainable recovery and a human-centered recovery and a human rights recovery. We will explore concrete tools, approaches, and good practices which the participant can apply in their work from government, civil society, private sector, or academia. And that's why we structured the event around three key segments. The first one will look at state commitments and alignment of response and recovery measures with the 2030 Agenda on human rights frameworks. The second will look at civil society advocacy strategies to increase Sustainable Development Goal accountability. The last segment, which is important, will look at the citizens' awareness and citizenship values to promote the SDG and create agents for change. It's about capabilities, about capacity development, and investing in the human resources. Just last week, a significant number of UN member states signed a Sustainable Recovery Pledge, expressing commitment to build back better from the pandemic, with the human rights at the heart of this agenda. And of course, guided by the 2030 Sustainable Agenda and the Paris Declaration Agreement. The pledge was initiated by Denmark in collaboration with the Danish Institute for Human Rights and Universal Rights Group. And it is my pleasure now to give the floor to His Excellency Permanent Representative of Denmark to the United Nations in New York, Ambassador Bill Herman. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, I was just busy sending a message, a greeting to all friends around the world. But so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everybody around the world. I see we have colleagues from Nepal, from Tanzania, from Argentina, and also we are across the world. But thank you so much, Bohin, for giving me the chance to address you today, and to all of you for joining this learning event. We are more than 150 participants spread around the world. And that, I think, is great news, because coming together to share experiences and learning from each other has probably never been more important than in this exact moment in time. Because we are facing a historic challenge, not only with the pandemic, which continues to wreak havoc around the world, but also in building back from the pandemic. But at the same time, that presents us, I think, with a historic opportunity to truly build back better and greener, and to do so guided by, of course, the 2030 agenda, but with human rights front and center. Now, I think although we've been set back by the pandemic, the destination and the ambition remains the same, to achieve the sustainable development goals by 2030. Now, it's beyond questioning that the pandemic has been used by many as a pretext for violating human rights and fundamental freedom. And across the globe, we see worrying tendencies of backtracking on basic human rights, in particular when it comes to the rights of women and girls. But we also see shrinking democratic and civic space. And the reality, of course, is that we know that we can't really make sustainable development a reality if we don't engage all parts of society, if we don't utilize to the full extent of its potential all actors in society. Now, government has a big role to play, but the reality, of course, is without civil society engagement, we'll never get all the way. So we need to find solutions together and make it a joint venture, if you like, to implement them on every level. Now, the high-level political forum is a chance to get together, as we do now, to find these solutions. And of course, it would have been great for all of us to meet physically, as we have done many years. But I think the virtual platforms also present us with the opportunity of including those that might otherwise not have been included. So this is an opportunity to present and discuss, of course, national implementation strategies. They're very much at the center here. And some of you will know that actually on Wednesday, 14th of July, the second Danish VNR will be presented. We presented our first one back in 2017, so we are second timers. I want to say a few words about the Danish VNR report, because it's clearly been a much more collaborative and inclusive process around doing the Danish VNR this time around. And we have a VNR report, which is not just the government's report, but it's actually also the report of civil society and stakeholders across the board. They have not only contributed, they have written their own sections, totally unedited and uncensored by government in the report. So they have not just been taken into consideration, they are actually featured in the report themselves, all these findings and assessments by civil society. Just as we have civil society and youth delegates that are present and active part of our delegation here at the high-level political forum, but actually also on our social media platform. Not as a token gesture, but because they are a key part of our society. They are a key part of who we are. They are Denmark too. And so we do this because it's the right thing to do. It adds value. And we want actually the UN as a whole to do more so that we can all achieve more. But we also do it because it's the smart thing to do, as is a human rights-based approach. Because having human rights as our guiding star, I think is in many ways is our chance to deliver for everyone and to leave no one behind, to truly live up to the opening words of the UN Charter, we the peoples. This is ultimately about people. But this means that we need to put individuals and their rights at the center of all our efforts, every priority, every plan, and every pledge. And that's also why, Bohin, as you mentioned, that Denmark last week launched the Sustainable Recovery Pledge in Geneva, where 47 countries committed to a human rights-based approach to sustainable COVID-19 recovery. We would have loved to see 193 but there's still a chance to join the pledge for those that haven't yet done so. Now, with the Sustainable Recovery Pledge, we express our determination to build back better from the pandemic with respect for human rights at the heart of our recovery efforts. And we reiterate our commitment to the 2030 agenda grounded in states' human rights obligations as the blueprint for building back better, as well as to, of course, the Paris Agreement. Let's not forget that climate change has not taken a break during COVID-19. Now, allow me to reiterate a little bit about sort of the importance of states' human rights obligations, because as much as we need the advocacy, the expertise, and the engagement from civil society, we also need the political will and commitment from world leaders. Now, from the Human Rights Declaration to the Paris Agreement, the signatures of countries has to some extent determine the way forward. And we should not forget this. Now, colleagues, I shan't take much more of your time, because we are, I think, on the threshold of building back better from a historic crisis. And I think it's so important that as we do everything we can to fight the pandemic, to get vaccines across the world, let's not waste this opportunity to build, I think, a more just, sustainable future, a more inclusive path towards 2030, and let our values to some extent shine through. So I think we need to use every occasion possible to learn from each other and to develop new tools to recover better in a more right, in a more just, in a more inclusive, and in a smarter way from this pandemic. We need to commit ourselves and each other to achieve the 2030 agenda, and to do so together, leaving no one behind. We need to listen to youth and civil society and marginalized groups, but not only listen. We need to actively give them say and an opportunity to be part of shaping the solutions. We simply cannot get to 2030 if all hands are not on deck. Now, I want, as my final words, to give you a little bit of a challenge that I'm myself reflecting on. That it is, let's look at what we did before COVID-19, the way we work, the goals we pursued, and the strategies that we deployed to achieve our goals, and then reflect a little bit on carefully on what we need to change going forward, so that we can be part of that course correction which is necessary for us to get to 2030 in a right, just, sustainable, and inclusive way, to build back better and greener for everyone. We actually need to do it with everyone. Now the time is to make it happen. Thanks so much, Bojan, for giving me the floor. And sorry for being a little bit lengthy.
No, thank you very much. That's very good way to set the stage for us and set the scene for our discussion. I think your emphasis on the multi-stakeholder engagement and endeavor, but also the importance of the agency of each of the stakeholder is critical. And I like what Rebecca in the chat is saying, that indeed we need all hands on deck to reach the 2030. We need all hands. And that's what we will be discussing in the next few segments. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for these introductory remarks. Let me give the floor to my colleague, Birgit Fering, from the Department Director of the Danish Institute for Human Rights. Birgit will be moderating the first segment. I would like you to keep an eye on the chat. It's very rich in terms of both the comments and suggestions from colleagues, but also resources that are shared by our organizers of this event and the participants. So please keep an eye on the chat. It's very rich in terms of the engagement as well. Birgit, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Bojan, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. I'm happy to be with you today. In the next 30 minutes, we will be talking about how states can align their response and recovery efforts from COVID-19 with not only the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, but also with their human rights commitments, thereby contributing in practice to realizing the Sustainable Recovery Pledge that we heard about, with a focus on those who are furthest behind. So we have some very important speakers lined up. but there will also hopefully be time for a very brief questions and answers. So please put your questions and comments in the chat, and we will revert to those at the end of this segment. But first of all, it is my immense pleasure to introduce the Ambassador of Costa Rica to the United Nations, Mr. Rodrigo Carrazzo, who has held a number of very important positions in his career, but he was also the first head of the Costa Rican National Human Rights Institution, the first Defensor de los Habitantes. So we know that Costa Rica is one of the countries that has signed the Sustainable Recovery Pledge. So, Ambassador, can we ask you, what are some of the concrete ways in which Costa Rica is using human rights and the 2030 Agenda to guide its response and recovery from COVID-19? Over to you, Senor Carrazzo. And I am afraid you're muted.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
now we hear you. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone, and I understand I will be making my remarks in Spanish, and so I should proceed if we are technically ready for that. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Ambassador, in English, please, and then we will see translation to French and Spanish.
Excuse me, not possible to do it in Spanish and translate to English. Otherwise, I'll make the translation as I go along. Excuse me.
I think we're waiting for confirmation here
From them.
because there should be translation available in Spanish and French, but can I have confirmation whether the ambassador can speak in Spanish also?
Yes, he can. The interpreter will have to just switch the languages, but it will be possible.
Excelente. Vamos a seguir en español, entonces.
Muchas gracias.
Embajador, tiene la palabra.
Merci bien, thank you. Muchas gracias a quienes organizan este importante evento. Muchas gracias al Instituto Danés para los Derechos Humanos, a la UNESCO, y muchas gracias por la pregunta que se nos formula. En realidad, en esta oportunidad me es muy satisfactorio escuchar y seguir a mi colega y amigo, el embajador Martin Herman, representante permanente de Dinamarca en Naciones Unidas, con quien y con quienes Costa Rica ha emprendido importantes esfuerzos conjuntos de colaboración y de provecho en el campo de los derechos humanos y de la participación de la sociedad civil en el quehacer público. Saludo también a mis panelistas, la señora Marcela Fabretto, jefa de la sección de Desarrollo Sostenible de la Oficina de la Alta Comisionada para los Derechos Humanos, a la señora Brigitte Feiring, directora del Departamento del Instituto Danés para los Derechos Humanos, y a la señora Ariane Adam, directora adjunta del Equal Rights Trust. Costa Rica coincide en la centralidad que ocupan los derechos humanos en la acción del Estado y particularmente en la recuperación frente a la pandemia, y coincide también en que el desarrollo de esos derechos humanos y la protección de los recursos naturales deben ir de la mano para alcanzar un verdadero desarrollo sostenible, un desarrollo verde, tal y como se acordó en la Agenda 2030. Los derechos humanos, entre los cuales la salud ocupa un campo fundamental, son inalienables, irrenunciables, interdependientes y además indispensables para el desarrollo. La pandemia del COVID-19 ha impactado directamente su disfrute, así como la capacidad de los gobiernos para procurar el bienestar de las mayorías, lo cual es, todos lo sabemos, la función principal del Estado, la de procurar el bienestar de las mayorías. Ayer se contabilizó oficialmente la muerte número 4 millones por causa del virus SARS-CoV-2. El secretario general de Naciones Unidas ha urgido al mundo a desplegar un plan global de vacunas, llamando nuevamente a la equidad en el acceso a las vacunas y diciendo que es hoy en día la más grande e inmediata prueba moral de nuestros tiempos. La primera tarea que el mundo tiene por delante para asegurar una recuperación sostenible es pues la de lograr que esa vacuna sea real y que beneficie a todos por igual, lo cual sabemos no es cierto al día de hoy. Costa Rica ha dedicado sus más grandes esfuerzos a proteger la salud, los derechos económicos y sociales, entre otras conquistas de su población, y especialmente los derechos de las personas más vulnerables por medio de 3 estrategias principales. En primer lugar, atendiendo a corto plazo las necesidades más inmediatas de la población, asegurando la continuidad de los servicios sociales, incluyendo la provisión de un ingreso básico de emergencia y haciendo un balance entre las restricciones sanitarias y la reapertura económica. Segundo, la importancia de asegurar transparencia, rendición de cuentas y participación ciudadana para la legitimidad y apoyo del público en la toma de decisiones. Costa Rica ha hecho públicas por medio de su Ministerio de Planificación el monto y la naturaleza de las inversiones destinadas a atender la pandemia, que pueden ser consultadas por cualquier persona en Internet. Asimismo, se han creado comités con el involucramiento de la sociedad civil para la toma de decisiones en materia de igualdad de género, de medio ambiente, entre otros. Creemos que no podemos perder de vista la necesidad de diseñar estrategias a largo plazo que tengan en cuenta las brechas preexistentes al COVID-19, tal y como nos lo mencionaba hace un par de minutos, para que se articulen las respuestas interinstitucionales e intersectoriales para la atención de las 3 dimensiones del desarrollo sostenible. Con el fundamental apoyo del Instituto Danés, Costa Rica cuenta con un bagaje oportuno en la recolección de datos sobre brechas relativas a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible como de los derechos humanos. A través del partenariado sobre los datos usados, como ha sido el caso del sistema de monitoreo de las recomendaciones, podemos medir más concretamente las brechas en términos de esas 2 variables para la población más vulnerable y de esta manera diseñar, cerrar esas brechas. Se mencionó que tuve el gran honor de ser el primer defensor de los habitantes, ombudsman en Costa Rica, y aprendí en aquella época muchísimo de todo lo que se hace en Dinamarca. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I think many countries are learning from also the experience of Costa Rica, including in integrating the environmental dimension into your sustainable recovery. I'm now turning to Marcela Fabretto, who is the Chief of the Sustainable Development Section at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the OHCHR. And the OHCHR, as we know, is the UN agency that is mandated to promote, to protect human rights for all. So, Marcela, can you tell us how is the OHCHR supporting countries in their efforts to ensure a human rights-based approach to response and recovery from the COVID pandemic? Over to you, Marcela.
Thank you, Birgit, and thank you, colleagues, excellencies, colleagues. Very good to be connected with this very important discussion. First of all, let me congratulate Denmark for launching the Sustainable Recovery Pledge and states that have signed on it, the timeliness and the importance of the initiative. I would like to spend a couple of minutes on which context we're dealing with before I zoom in on 3 aspects that exemplify the work that we're doing at the country level. On context, I think it's been mentioned, We are at a historic juncture with colossal challenges in terms of human rights and sustainable development. And we're seeing a cascade of human rights setbacks as a result of the pandemic, with millions more pushed farther behind. The issue of unequal access to vaccine could not be underscored enough, its injustice. And the fact that not only is killing people, but is hampering economic recovery in a big chunk, in a big number of countries. And so in this context, OHCHR and the rest of the UN have been advocating for much greater international cooperation and solidarity, especially low-income, middle-income countries which are dealing with debt distress. They urgently need liquidity and fiscal space to keep people afloat and rebuild fairer. And we have said that this two-speed economic recovery is not sustainable and can only take us to further human rights deterioration. We also said that we can't go back to economic and development models. They have not worked. They have underspent, seriously and systematically underspent in rights, economic and social rights, health, social protections, housing, water. And if there is one lesson of the pandemic, is that this underspending has made us all unprepared for what has come with COVID, and has put in place the condition for inequalities to become deeper. So ultimately, our point is that it's time for renewed commitment to human rights-based approaches to development, because this is the only way to reduce inequalities and put the 2030 agenda back on track. So in this context, what is it that we have done? Three things I'll sort of flag and highlight in this brief intervention. And then, of course, I would be happy to learn from those who are connected and engage in dialogue. First, we set up since last year, early last year, the SURGE initiative. This is a team of economists that work with our development and economic and social rights specialists. They have engaged with UN country teams, the 162 UN country teams, and our 90 plus field presences to step up our ability to place human rights at the center of COVID-19 socioeconomic emergency response and recovery assessment. This is about putting the spotlight and collecting data on the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 and making sure that we align the response to cater for indigenous groups, people with disability, racial and ethnic minorities, and other traditionally disadvantaged groups. It's about using a human rights lens in budgeting and public expenditure, making sure that even in a context of shrinking fiscal space, we look at option of reprioritizing public and expenditure to make sure that we keep social spending to minimum essential levels for rights, rethinking taxation, and introduce progressive fiscal policies, fighting corruption, looking at illicit financial flows. We have engaged in dialogue together with our colleagues in UN country teams on emergency financing for COVID and conditionalities with the IMF and other international financial institutions to make sure that, again, we align that financing with state obligation and binding commitments on maximizing resources for economic and social rights. This has been the case, for instance, in Ukraine and Lebanon, developing joint UNCT position and advice. We have looked at taxation and legislation in overall fiscal policies to advise on the risk of retrogression and a disproportionate impact on the poorest and the disadvantaged people. and advising on what could be rather a progressive way to introduce taxation to generate the resources for social spending. And we have, of course, in the context of this work, intensified our partnerships within the UN system, working with colleagues on the programmatic response and the analysis that needs to guide the programmatic response. And in this regard, I would like to bring the attention to a tool that we have put together with UNDP and DCO. Is a practical tool. It's a checklist for human rights-based approaches to COVID-19 emergency response and recovery that really unpacks in a quite practical and operational way what it looks like to integrate human rights in health responses, in building more inclusive social protection schemes, in looking at the human rights impact of economic measures and reforms. And I trust, the colleague is putting on the chat, so I hope everybody can benefit from the checklist. At the same time, we're also intensify the strategic discussion and consultation with ILO, UN Women, our sort of normative colleagues in the system on how we can leverage human rights, labor standard, gender equality in recovery, in the advice that the UN provides to states on recovery plans and immediate and more long-term solutions. I want to flag a third point, which is the wealth of advice, thematic advice and country advice from the human rights mechanism. They've been extremely active during the crisis in providing analysis, providing, putting the spotlight on gaps, issues that need to be urgently addressed, groups that are particularly disadvantaged and impacted by the crisis. And there's really like a wealth of practical recommendations that can be incorporated in the response and the recovery plans, and that cannot be left underutilized. We certainly make great use of them in our advice and assistance to states, and we're working with the government of Cameroon, for instance, in ways and strategies to expand budget on the right to health. We're working on a Zambia economic recovery assessment with UNDP and other colleagues. There are multiple examples that I'm ready to share if colleagues are interested, but what I'm trying to say is that the starting point is really this precious and valuable set of analysis that comes from the human rights mechanism, the review and the special procedures. So to conclude, colleagues, we know what needs to be done to rebuild fairer. It's not that we're short of solutions and ideas. We know that by being serious in applying human rights-based approaches to development, we can move forward and we can put the 2030 agenda back on track. This is really a question of policy choices. It's a question of political will. It's a question of leveraging SDG 16 and making sure that we maintain and expand the space for civil society, grassroots, the social movement to express grievances and advise on policy solutions, that we enforce national human rights institutions, that we protect freedom of speech. And so by leveraging SDG 16 and looking at the wealth of advice and recommendation that we have on economic and social rights, and the commitments that states have voluntarily got into by binding themselves under international human rights law on maximizing resources for social spending, we believe that we can rebuild fair. But it's really a matter of not falling back into business as usual, and providing leadership and transformative leadership and vision. I'll stop here, Birgit, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from other colleagues and engaging in the discussion. Over.
Thank you so much, Marcela, also for highlighting the need to align economies with human rights obligations. Without that, I don't think we go very far in order to rebuild fairer, greener, more sustainable, more equal, etc. We have very little time for the last two speakers, so we'll ask both of them to be very focused and to the point. But it's now my pleasure to turn to Ariane Adam, who is the Deputy Director at Equal Rights Trust, an organization which works to combat discrimination and promote equality. So Ariane, what are some of the concrete ways that we can ensure that response and recovery measures do not reinforce or even worsen inequalities, but actually help us to build back more equal? Over to you, Ariane.
Thank you, Brigitte, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers of this event and for inviting the Equal Rights Trust. It is a pleasure to participate in this panel. Almost every state in the world has accepted equality obligations by ratification of the human rights treaties, and equality also underpins the Sustainable Development Goals, and Goal 10 specifically commits states to reduce inequality. Many policy responses to COVID-19, however, have had discriminatory impacts, and these impacts are very often unintended, with the adoption of policies indirectly discriminating against one or more groups. To offer a few well-documented examples, as most states around the world imposed lockdowns with the intention of controlling the spread of the virus, domestic violence against women surged. There was also a disproportionate effect on women in labor, as in many households, women assumed the majority of the caring responsibilities. Some states adopted policies of allowing men and women to leave their homes on alternate days in an effort to limit the number of people on the streets. But this policy, however, put many trans and non-binary people at risk, exposing them to physical violence and verbal abuse by other members of the public. And while access to millions of learners was compromised by school closures, there was a discriminatory impact on the right to education for students whose households couldn't afford the equipment necessary to facilitate online learning. And students with visual disabilities were unable to make use of many online resources. As we move into the recovery phase, we see discriminatory threats emerging. These include, again, to offer very few examples, the use of immunization passports to control movement within and between states, as well as access to services. Discriminatory treatment may occur at the hands of the state or private actors. They may also occur in employment in the form of dismissal, demotion, exclusion from work-related opportunities. As measures are lifted, certain groups are being disproportionately affected. There is concern by many who have pre-existing conditions or are more vulnerable to the virus because of a protected characteristic, including age, race, ethnicity, or disability, that lifting restrictions too soon in favor of economic growth will leave them particularly vulnerable and with insufficient assistance from the state. And then there is an impact of unlockdown on sectors which are overrepresented by certain groups due to horizontal segregation of labor. For example, minority groups being overrepresented in service sector roles. It is in this context that the Equal Rights Trust has been advocating since May last year for equality impact assessment to be integrated in all policy responses as an essential tool for states to meet non-discrimination obligations under international human rights law and ensure that no one is left behind in our pandemic recovery. Equality impact assessment is aimed at identifying and eliminating the actual or potential discriminatory effects of state policies and ensuring that policies respond to and accommodate the different needs of diverse groups. A substantial and meaningful equality impact assessment involves the following steps: considering available quantitative data and research, collecting qualitative data, importantly through engagement and consultation with groups at risk of discrimination and experiencing inequality, using the information gathered to decide whether
I just want to say that you would have to wrap up now because we're running out of time, please.
Yes, sir. Using the information gathered to decide whether there is or is likely to be a discriminatory impact. And then if there is such an impact, ensuring that steps are taken to mitigate the effects. So this is why we advocate equality impact assessment as essential to the policy response and as something that should be preempted, coming before policies are adopted, but also something that is integrated in the monitoring and review of all of our policy responses.
Thank you so much, Ariane, and I'm sure you can share links and resources in the chat so that people can look more into this. Last but not least, I just want to very briefly give the floor to my own colleague from the Danish Institute for Human Rights, Maria Ploug Petersen, who will very briefly introduce a tool for sustainable recovery. Maria, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'll just be sharing my screen here. We'll be posting a link in the chat. We've created a resource called the Human Rights Guide to Sustainable Recovery. It helps uncover the links between the 2030 agenda and the underpinning human rights. As you scroll down on the site of the landing page, you'll find a page for each of the SDGs, and note that this guide is also available in Spanish here and through the links. On each of these pages, you can go in and you can see a rationale for how the pandemic has impacted this SDG area. We highlight specific SDG targets of utmost relevance and importance. We point to key response and recovery actions. You can find examples of human rights laws and standards that are underpinning the SDG, as well as a compilation of key human rights guidance from the international human rights system. We also point out, as Marcela mentioned, the valuable recommendations coming from the international human rights mechanisms to countries linked to the SDGs. And to see more details on that, you can visit our data explorer, which we'll also post a link to, where you can filter by country, by SDG, and see the specific recommendations to countries that can be used in sustainable response and recovery. And for all human rights links underpinning the SDGs, please visit our Human Rights Guide to the SDGs, which we'll also post a link to. And with this, I'll hand back to Birgitte. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maria. I think that was a world record in speed talking. Let me just wrap this up by emphasizing, as also mentioned by Ambassador Hermansen in the beginning, that the pledge for sustainable recovery is still open to state signatories, and it's also open for non-state civil society support. So please visit the website and see if your institution can also join and contribute to these joint efforts. Thank you very much, and back to you, Bohine.
Thank you, Birgit. It's really very rich, and please keep an eye on the chat. There are many resources there. I have been learning a lot in this session from colleagues, and I'm very pleased to see the tool that the Institute has developed, and I would like to look at the SDG 4.1 because we can enrich it maybe with what UNESCO is doing on regarding the right to education. I will come back to that later on. Let us move to the next segment of our discussion today. As Ambassador mentioned earlier, we spoke about the role of states and the obligation. Now we will speak about other stakeholders that are very critical. That's about the civil society and ensuring that the SDG accountability through smart advocacy that the colleagues will be presenting in this segment. So without a delay, let me give the floor now to Ms. Halima Sharif. She's the country director of Advanced Family Planning in Tanzania, John Hopkins Center for Communication Program in Tanzania. And Halima, you have two objectives. One, to get us through this segment and get the richness of the presentation, and to save some time, so that we stay on time for our next session. Please, over to you, Halima.
Thank you very much for this opportunity for all of us at the Advanced Family Planning Project in the United States and across all countries implementing this project. Greetings, everyone. So in the first segment of our presentation, we will introduce the Smart Advocacy Guide an important tool that has shown to deliver results to drive progress towards the SDGs. We will also share learnings from its use within the Advanced Family Planning Project, which is a family planning advocacy initiative, which is implemented and refined smart advocacy for more than a decade in countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. You will learn about how advocacy can contribute to progress towards SDGs, highlighting an example from Tanzania, and finally, hear from our program leads in Nigeria and Kenya about how they've utilized media advocacy to enhance accountability at national and subnational level. The Advanced Family Planning Initiative, based in the Bill and Melinda Gates Institute for Population and Reproductive Health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, adopted the SMART approach to increase funding and political commitment to quality voluntary family planning. But the SMART advocacy approach is easily adapted to any topic, location, or advocacy need. SMART advocacy also benefits from being applied and refined in resource-limited settings, which makes it scalable to different budgets and political jurisdictions. I would now like to introduce my colleague, Thuy Linh Nguyen, Advanced Family Planning Monitoring and Evaluation Manager, to take you through the SMART advocacy approach. Over to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Halima. And just to introduce everyone to the SMART Advocacy Guide, the guide is a step-by-step guide that helps you develop, implement, and monitor an advocacy strategy. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And the SMART advocacy approach applies each of these 5 principles throughout the advocacy process. There are 9 steps to SMART advocacy, and the guide will take you through all 9 steps, from understanding and mapping the landscape to setting a SMART objective, understanding the decision maker, figuring out what the ask would be, and creating a work plan for that. It also has a monitoring framework for you to help capture results, monitor implementation of the strategy, and document your impact. It's a framework to help achieve discrete policy and funding decisions that are critical to advancing an issue, and it's focused on the decision makers, the people with the power to act. And it also creates well-prepared advocacy champions. In the 12 years of advanced family planning, we've learned a few things about how to facilitate local leadership and build resilient advocacy. First, AFP implements advocacy through an advocacy working group model and through coalition building. The advocacy working groups engage government officials as key stakeholders, informants, messengers, and champions. In fact, nearly half of the members of AFP advocacy working groups come from the government. These are the people who understand how change can happen within the government. We also use a facilitative process for strategy development, and through this process, we uncover how change can be made, who the decision makers and the influencers are, and to build consensus on the advocacy plan, what the ask is, what the messages are, and who the messengers should be. We also utilize a very simple and actionable monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan that focuses on what's most important to track to inform smarter advocacy, and also what's possible to track, keeping in mind that the reporting burden should be kept to a minimum. The advocacy strategies that you will develop using the SMART Advocacy Guide will be, by design, highly adaptable, integrating and applying learnings from monitoring, evaluation, and learning to adapt and make for more effective advocacy strategies. And finally, you'll hear a lot more about this later on in our segment, but over the past several years, we have empowered and engaged local journalists to support advocacy and accountability efforts through our media advocacy work. For example, journalists can help report on unfulfilled commitments, report on emerging issues and developments, and also provide positive reinforcement and recognition when progress is made. So what can SMART advocacy achieve? I'll share some of our key highlights from the Advanced Family Planning Initiative. Since 2009, we have achieved over 2,200 advocacy wins. across the areas of budget, policy, and visibility. An advocacy win is a smart objective that is achieved, and it's a discrete policy or funding decision that's critical to advancing an issue, and it represents an incremental change that helps achieve progress towards a broader goal. We've also mobilized over $111 million for family planning since 2012, both from national and subnational governments. In our focus countries, where many of the governments and budget decisions are devolved to lower levels of government, advocates have worked more closely at the subnational levels to make sure that funds are being mobilized. When we talk about advocacy wins, we have referred to budget wins, policy wins, and visibility wins. Here you can just see a couple of examples of what we mean. For example, a budget win would be 7 Kenyan counties allocating a total of 1.3 million for family planning in 2018, which represents a 407% increase compared to 2015 funding levels. A policy win is Kamwenge district in Uganda passing a resolution and announcing every last Wednesday of the month being dedicated for the provision of youth-friendly family planning services. And finally, what we mean by a visibility win is a local radio station in Lualaba province in the DRC broadcasting stories about the importance of contraceptive use on 5 of their health-focused shows and producing 2 weekly shows exclusively on family planning, all at their own costs. For this next part, I will turn it back over to Halima. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for availing us with insights on the smart advocacy approach and how it facilitates attainment of policy, funding, and visibility advocacy wins, among others. Let us explore how this advocacy approach works towards attaining the SDG goals, and we will highlight an example from Tanzania. As you well know, there are countless ways in which advocacy can help drive progress towards the SDGs, but here are a few concrete examples. Domestic resource mobilization through budget advocacy focuses on where budget decisions are made within the local context, be it central or local decentralized governments. Improve policy and enhance policy coherence, SDG 17, which not only ensures healthy lives, which is SDG 3, but also enables people to exercise more autonomy on their sexual and reproductive health, which in turn enables a more productive workforce for all, including young people, which is SDG 8. Also strengthen public, private, civil society partnerships and coalitions so as to strengthen the global partnership for sustainable development, SDG 17. Now, in Tanzania, long procurement processes and procedures, taxes and levies imposed on health commodities, including contraceptives, coupled with overlapping roles in government agencies responsible for procurement, necessitated AFP advocates to engage the Tanzania Law Reform Commission and work with parliamentary champions to endorse a special provision in the Public Procurement Act 2016 to fast-track life-saving health commodities, including contraceptives. In July 2018, AFP advocacy efforts resulted in the government abolishing donation fees charged on reproductive health commodities, including contraceptives imported by development partners. In tracking the implementation of the Public Procurement Act of 2016, we found that some progress had been made, namely inclusion of family planning in essential medicine lists and structural reforms in government agencies involved in facilitating commodity procurement and clearance. Also, the Tanzania Food and Drugs Authority was renamed to be the Tanzania Medicines and Medical Devices Authority, making it solely responsible for regulating safety, quality, and effectiveness of medicines, medical devices, and diagnostics, hence reducing bureaucratic agencies involved in the procurement process, which had in the past caused significant delays in the procurement process. So between 2016 to 2020, AFP's advocacy through national coalitions helped mobilize over $27 million for family planning from government. AFP Tanzania's advocacy efforts with the Ministry of Health, Preventive Services, as well as working closely with parliamentary committees towards increasing disbursement from the family planning budget, resulted in the government procuring 90% of the contraceptives needed for financial year 2019-2020. The funds used for contraceptive procurement included contributions from development partners. So finally now, in this third segment of our presentation, we are now going to be shifting gear to media advocacy and how it complemented AFP's smart advocacy approach, especially in enhancing accountability at both national and subnational level. AFP's media advocacy efforts began in mid-2016. It gained ground in 6 countries between 2018 and 2022. And to date, it has immensely contributed to increased coverage of family planning issues, as well as influenced decisions and actions around family planning budget and policy outcomes at country level. To discuss about how we have engaged journalists to hold policymakers accountable to their SDG commitments, specifically around sexual and reproductive health, and the role of media in maintaining the prioritization of key advocacy issues like family planning during the COVID-19 pandemic, we are joined by 2 panelists. Irene Choge, the Media Advocacy Manager for Advanced Family Planning at Jhpiego, Kenya, and Sakina Amin Bello, the Senior Program Advisor in Reproductive Health and Lead for Advanced Family Planning at Pathfinder, Nigeria. So welcome, ladies, and let me begin with you, Irene, all the way from Kenya. What did you do to sustain media commitment to family planning issues?
Thank you very much, Halima. And yes, it is important that we continue sustaining commitments for family planning and ensuring that the media still tells family planning stories amidst the pandemic. So one of the things we did is that we ensured that family planning is not just told as a standalone story, that family planning is intertwined or linked with SDGs, for example, told from an angle of economy, told from an angle of development. This way, by doing this way, you bring newness to the story, to the family planning story, and ensuring that with this new angle, journalists will still carry your story. The other thing that we've also done to ensure that there is commitment is that we've been working with editors in the newsroom. So editors know what we are doing, and they've even taken part in selecting the journalists we would be working with. Some of these editors have actually even been part of an editorial mentorship board, which they mentor journalists pro bono to tell in-depth family planning stories. Another thing also is that we've also secured segments by local radio stations. And these segments are done or are given by these radio segments free of charge. So they air stories at their own cost. So these are some of the things that we've done to just ensure that the commitment is there, and also training of journalists has also contributed to this. Halima.
Thank you very much, Irene. Keeping the FP news fresh and holding the hands of editors who are key decision makers. Now to you, Sakina, based on your experience working with the media in Nigeria, how does media advocacy enhance accountability across different sectors and actors?
Thank you, Halima. So in Nigeria, we engage journalists in our advocacy work across several states of the country. But one of the best examples comes from Kaduna State, a state in northern Nigeria where there are huge gaps in the health sector. Family Planning Health Advocates in Nigeria initiative called FANI is the advocacy working group in Kaduna. With technical support from AFP, they developed and launched an annual budget performance scorecard to highlight the government's financial investment and commitment for family planning in the state. The scorecard was widely shared among stakeholders, including government, civil society organizations, and of course the media, to increase access to family planning budget performance information, as well as generate discussions to influence action by the government. As part of its accountability strategy, the media arm of FANI, which comprises journalists from various media outlets, used the data and the information on this scorecard to develop content that was used to write articles and stories in newspapers, radio, and TV programs. In one of such programs in late 2017, the media asked the government for timely release of the budgeted funds for family planning. They also asked that citizens should participate in the budget formulation and execution. That same year, the group and its representatives were invited by the government to make contributions and to make a case for family planning in the 2018 budget formulation, which was in a town hall meeting. So the 2018 budget in the following year was released in a timely manner, and the procurement, which is what was meant for, was also made. So having achieved this win, a subsequent discussion identified that the consumables that were procured were still in a store somewhere. They were not distributed to the service delivery points. The media yet again sprung into action, which contributed immensely in influencing the government to act, and they quickly distributed consumables and supplies to all the health facilities in the state. In addition, the media were invited by the government themselves to witness the distribution and cover the event, and it was aired across media stations in the state. And this time around, the media was not asking government to do anything, but rather were commending government for the job well done. This example clearly shows that advocates, government officials, citizens, and journalists can all come together to increase transparency, improve governance, and advance the health and well-being for all. Thank you. Halima, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sakina, for that powerful conclusion. So back to you, Irene. During these times of COVID-19 pandemic, what has been the role of the media, and specifically in sustaining essential services?
Thank you very much, Halima. I would like to say that the media has actually been a formidable ally during the pandemic. So during the lockdown, the media's importance to our work only grew. Journalists in nearly all AFP countries were deemed essential workers, meaning that they could leave home, move around in cities and communities, and even break curfew hours to report on urgent stories. So some of the stories they highlighted actually led to action. I want to give you an example here in Kenya, where AFP partner Jhpiego, working with reproductive health and family planning stakeholders, engaged the Council of Governors to catalyze action around continuity of essential services during the COVID-19 response. Truth be told is that these services had actually been halted, that everybody was just thinking about the pandemic, but these are equally important services. So in May 2020, the chairperson of the Council of Governors actually issued a memorandum to all 47 counties, instructing them to continue essential health services, including family planning during COVID-19 response efforts. The Ministry of Health also went further and issued guidelines on continuity of essential services. We see that the media really provided support to continuity of health services by highlighting stories showing how essential services had been affected. Another example is also here in Kenya, is that NFP working with Kakamega County, for instance, worked to see that the media highlights stories that showcase best practices in the county. One of these best practices is that the county had come up with a hotline for pregnant women to call at night so that they can access services. But because there was curfew, everyone was afraid of going to hospital. But you know, when a child wants to come at night for a mother, you have to deliver. So the media actually told these stories, told the best practice of Kakamega County and the hotlines. And this actually catalyzed actions of other counties. We saw other counties embracing this, and women were able to access services. So this is how the media has actually become an ally during this pandemic. And I can go on.
Thank you. Thank you, Irene. And I've been asked by the moderator to save time. I don't know how I'm doing on that. However, finally, and in a very brief manner, to both of you, few seconds, and I'll start with Sakina. If there is one thing you could advise family planning or even health sector stakeholders or any other stakeholder on how to work with the media, what would that be? Once Sakina is done, take over, Irene. Thank you.
So thank you, Halima. I would say engage with the media proactively rather than being reactive. Build their capacity. Don't assume their knowledge. Rather, provide them with the correct information, evidence, and data they need in reporting their stories. Irene.
Right, thank you so much. We've talked about building back better, rebuilding fairer, rebuilding greener. And the people who are going to help us do this is the media. The media has a huge following. So one of the things we need to do is to understand how the media works and always strive to get new angles to whatever issue we are handling, whatever issue we are telling, we get new angles. And the last thing I would like to say, let's not go to the media naked. Let's get our facts right so that we don't have issues of being misquoted. Thank you.
Thank you for a very great soundbite, Irene. Thank you very much, Sakina. So today, ladies and gentlemen, you have learned about a smart advocacy model that has been proven effective in mobilizing domestic resources and driving policy change towards achieving SDGs, and about how advocates on the ground have engaged the media as a mechanism for enhancing accountability and for keeping health and development priorities on the government radar screen, especially during current challenging times of the COVID pandemic. If this session has activated the advocate in you, or you simply just want to connect with other seasoned advocates in your country, we encourage you to check out AFP's website, where you can find all the tools and resources related to the smart advocacy approach, read stories about advocacy wins, and also meet the advocates behind our work. You can also join our mailing list to receive updates on the launch of the refreshed Smart Advocacy Guide. Thank you all for listening, and back to you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, Halima. C'était une session très importante. La discussion que nous avons eue maintenant, elle est très importante par rapport à la discussion que nous voulons avancer au niveau du rôle de la société civile. Cet outil SMART est un outil très important tel qu'on l'a écouté, mais aussi le rôle des médias tel que mentionné par Irène et par Sakina donne vraiment des idées pour l'action des acteurs au niveau national, au niveau régional et au niveau international. Merci encore à tous les collègues qui ont organisé ce segment. On va passer au troisième segment et je vais parler en anglais. We will move now to the third segment, which is about the role of the citizenship, the role of actors like teachers, and how we can advance the Sustainable Development Agenda and the global citizenship. Earlier in the discussion, we had a lot of reference to the right to education, and obviously the right to education is one of the human rights that we have to protect and we have to advance in the context of the COVID, in the context of the recovery, in the context of building back better and differently. And we have colleagues from ProFuturo who helped us organize this third segment that is about awareness raising and active citizenship through digital education. And of course, the combination of technology and the educational resources is critical in this area. So for this segment, we will hear from two key speakers. First of all, we'll hear from Ms. Magdalena Breyer, General Director of the ProFuturo. And then we'll also hear from Ms. Dina Buchbinder, who is founder and president of Education for Sharing. We would like to start, first of all, with you, Magdalena. Thank you for being with us. And we would like to hear from you what ProFuturo is doing and what are the initiatives that you are leading in advancing this agenda. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Borhin. Thank you very much to everyone. Dear friends and colleagues, it is a great honor to be invited to speak at this special event promoted by UNDESA and UNITAR in the framework of the United Nations High-Level Political Forum meeting on sustainable recovery. I am also pleased to share this time of debate and reflection with our session partners, the Danish Permanent Mission and of the United Nations, the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and my co-host at this segment, Dina Buchbinder from Education for Sharing. Education is a fundamental and universal human right. As such, societies as a whole and governments in concrete have the duty to make every effort necessary to sustain it and keep preparing the younger generations for the future they will lead. That is the reason why, in the aftermath of this pandemic, we must look out to not lose the progress achieved so far and keep on working on key issues for the future development of societies. During more than a year, we have, of course, put the focus on health, but it is time to start thinking on the recovery, and to do so, we need to consider many other aspects of our lives, being education one of them. As it has already been said, the crisis generated by the COVID-19 pandemic threatens the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, among them the achievement of the SDG 4 related to education. Overnight, the world was forced to close schools, leaving at the peak of the crisis over 1.2 billion students without classes in 143 countries and affecting 9 million teachers. By March 2021, UNESCO data showed that more than 1.6 billion children had lost instructional time for many months at a time, if not for more, during the last year. The interruption of in-class education did not only affect students who suddenly saw their futures in danger, but also teachers who were not fully prepared to provide remote schooling. The lost time is hard to recover, and impact on children's education is beyond all measure. But this also creates an opportunity to redesign education in new ways, to rethink the path ahead and address systemic injustice. We are facing the biggest change in education since the public schooling emerged in the 19th century. It is the time for digital education that allows to reach more people, personalize learning, and implement innovative teaching learning experience aimed at developing 21st century skills. Digital competences are crucial for children and teachers to become effective change makers in a digital world. Technology is a key ally for this change, but by itself will do nothing unless we are able to introduce new methodologies and new contents to create better global citizens. That is why we consider the education on the SDG to be a priority. Their inclusion as a content in education and children and teachers' awareness is a fundamental piece in the way towards their implementation. The title of this segment is Active Citizenship Through Digital Education, and we are going to present a concrete example, a project that combines these two key elements. But before we do that, let me first introduce briefly to you what is ProFuturo and what we do. ProFuturo is a digital education program created in 2016 by Telefónica Foundation and La Caixa Foundation to narrow the education gap in the world. Our vision is to improve the quality of education of millions of children around the world living in vulnerable environments. We work nowadays in 40 countries in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia, and have benefited over 19 million children and trained more than 900,000 teachers. Our experience working with education in remote, vulnerable, and most of the times unconnected contexts has been very useful to many governments and organizations during the pandemic. We have been asked frequently during the last year to share our knowledge and to collaborate in the definition of contingency plans for education in many countries around the world. But way before the pandemic, we already had the priority of transforming and improving the quality of education, especially of the most vulnerable ones. That is why we have always put a great effort on sharing our work and experience with other partners to reach the greatest number of students and teachers as possible. That is why we are constantly looking for new opportunities that allow us to grow and enlarge our digital education program. This is how we came to know Education for Sharing, an organization specialized in values education through play and with long-standing experience. Given our common compromise with the SDG 4 and also SDG 17 on partnerships, in 2019, we started developing a project to merge Education for Sharing methodology and the digital education approach of ProFuturo, which ended up as the 2030 Club. My colleague, Mrs. Dina Buchbinder, will speak more about the way they include the SDGs into education through play, but let me focus now on this joint project. 2030 Club is a digital education initiative aimed at creating key competences in teachers and students about sustainable development and thus turn them into agents of change. The 2030 Club provides teachers a series of tools, games, and resources in a digital form to be used at school. The implementation is supported by teacher guides that make this proposal easy and practical both for teachers and students. Teachers, as key players of the learning process, have been consulted and interviewed during the design and testing phases of the project to ensure that their experience and insights of the potential users of the project were included. By September 2020, a demo of the product was ready and certified, and we have been testing it at schools since then, as Dina will tell you afterwards. This project is an opportunity to increase the knowledge of the Sustainable Development Goals among children and teachers around the world, and we are ready to scale it up. We have prepared a short video to show you how the 2030 Club works, its logic and possibilities. Please proceed with the video.
How to convey to students the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals for the future of the planet and of each of us. 2030 Club was born as an answer to this. It is an educational proposal created by ProFuturo, the digital education program of Telefonica Foundation and La Caixa Foundation, and Education for Sharing. This initiative seeks to provide children around the world with the key skills for sustainable development through a cross-cutting theme, as are the Sustainable Development Goals promoted by the United Nations in the 2030 Agenda. 2030 Club is a digital education resource designed to enable teachers to incorporate the SDGs into their curriculum planning, combining digital and experiential learning, grouped into a training plan and 4 missions: humanity, progress, environment, and peace and community. Each mission brings the contents of the SDGs closer to the participants and integrates them into their daily life situations throughout 3 moments. We travel to discover and learn about other countries in the world with great challenges or achievements related to the SDGs so that students can relate these situations to their own reality. We play to achieve understanding and comprehension through playful activities so that children can experience certain situations in a symbolic way. And finally, we act to reflect and learn about each SDG that we worked on in the previous moments. In short, it is an interdisciplinary digital initiative that seeks to promote active citizenship at school, capable of helping us face the current global challenges that await us.
Before giving the floor to my colleague Dina, let me conclude by sharing some final thoughts with you. We are only safe if everyone is safe. The speed at which the coronavirus has traveled has given a powerful reminder of how tightly humanity is linked together. Let's use that link to recover and become stronger than before. Future recovery actions must strengthen public education, fortify common goods, and expand a global solidarity that emphasizes the collective responsibility for the education of everyone everywhere. History is being written with great speed, and we are faced with choices and decisions that will define the future of education. Responses to the pandemic will be different from one place to another, but they must be based on a humanistic vision of education and development and consequent with the SDGs and human rights already existing frameworks. The link between human rights, sustainable development, and education has never been more important than now. We must redesign education, and the concept of sustainable development has to be part of it. Please, Dina.
Thank you so much, my dear Magdalena, and to the rest of my colleague speakers, organizers, and participants sharing this space. And thank you for doing all you do. As Magdalena mentioned, in Education for Sharing, we use the power of our play, reflect, and take action methodology to form better global citizens. And we have been doing this for over 14 years. So yes, since the Millennium Development Goals. My colleague Magdalena said I would speak about the way we include the SDGs into education through play. It sounds a little bit abstract, so let me share an example concretely of how we do this. Imagine a game that's called Doctor Doctor. So we have two teams and there is a ball that tags each team, that goes from one team to the other. Now this ball represents a disease. It may be a virus. It may be the coronavirus. And in each team we have a doctor with a number of medicine shots or vaccines. And so as it happens in real life, the participants get short of vaccines. And so they have to go out of the game. Now, participants also have to do strategies together in team to come up with solutions to take care of their doctor and to take care of themselves and to prevent getting the disease. So it does seem like real life indeed. Now, children reflect after the game on what values were present, what SDGs are we talking about, and what can we do about this from today, from where they are. So I want to share that in neuroscience, there are two kinds of learning. One is declarative learning. We can learn about the value of empathy or teamwork or respect, but that won't necessarily make us empathetic or team players or respectful towards others. There is the second kind of learning, which is procedural learning, which is the practice of it. How we incorporate this learning of the values in practice. So actually these two kinds of learnings bring different brains, use different brain circuits. And guess what? We need both kinds. So this is what we are doing. We are allowing and facilitating children, teachers, and parents to understand why they care and be active participating in the solutions of what they care about. So one of the most important ingredients in the Education for Sharing formula is the 2030 agenda. We use the Sustainable Development Goals as pedagogical content in each of the activities we implement in schools and other education institutions. Now, having the SDGs in the very core of our model allows us to give teachers tools that they really need to transform their classrooms and empower themselves and their students as agents of change that are capable of improving their communities. The best part is that they achieve this while enjoying and teaching their formal curriculum. So it's not an extra. Since 2007, we've worked with over 1.3 million teachers, students, parents in thousands of schools, shelters, and other spaces in 8 countries. And our beneficiaries have created thousands of team projects, concrete, tangible team projects towards addressing the SDGs. Now, the story about how we met ProFuturo is a concrete example of walking the talk for a systemic holistic recovery, making SDG 17 live and live to address structural inequalities in the long term. So we met this amazing ProFuturo team in March 2018 when we were invited to give a workshop at the SDG Global Festival for Action in Bonn, Germany. And ProFuturo was also there because they were searching for practical ideas to incorporate the 2030 agenda in their super innovative educational solution. It was a match made in heaven, like partnerships that we must continue to seek are SDG 17, or teamwork as we call it, is alive in this collaboration. We implemented an E4S session together in a German public high school, and the rest is history. As Magdalena mentioned, our collaboration started with the creation of the 2030 Club. When we hear the word club, what do you typically think about? It may sound like something exclusive, but guess what? We are re-signifying this word when using Club 2030 or Club 2030 to an inclusive space that takes into consideration different realities and where everyone is invited to belong. We are determined to leave no one behind. 2030 Club joins the best of worlds, the best of both worlds, the power of play and the power of technology. 2030 Club is available in Spanish and English so far. We piloted this initiative, 2030 Club, from December 2020 to February 2021. Yes, we did this in the middle of the pandemic. And you know what? It was a huge success. Teachers were thirsty and very much in need of innovative ideas to continue teaching and motivating their students, even with the schools closed. The pilot was implemented in Mexico, and teachers from different states decided actively to be part of it. Let me share some of the results. 100% of teachers considered they had learned a significant learning in 2030 Club. They mentioned awareness about the global challenges, knowledge on the SDGs and how to address them with their students, knowledge on playful strategies and innovative strategies to promote learning and the use of imagination with their students, incorporating a playful focus in the strategies of learning, to address social impact in a cross-cutting way throughout the different subject areas, creating awareness in their students to have a better world. The top 5 of the words that teachers used to define Club 2030 Club were excellent, interactive, accessible, dynamic, and innovative. The main positive and main strength that teachers highlight during their experience in 2030 Club is that they retake the SDGs and they can pinpoint each one of them throughout very fun, enjoyable activities for the students. They think that the SDGs are extra relevant and current and must be approached from the student's point of view to promote reflection and to start doing actions from their immediate context with their school, their family, their community to build a better world. Most of teachers, actually 90%, thought this is extremely useful to link the contents from 2030 Club to their school planning, and they will carry it on going forward. Even more than this, I was especially moved by the comments from teachers. A teacher told us that she has forgotten the sense of giving classes during the pandemic. And guess what? She found it again using 2030 Club. We will implement 2030 Club together in the last trimester of 2021 and in 2022 in at least 5 countries in Latin America and Africa. It is being translated to Portuguese and French. So just as a form of closure, the future is uncertain by definition, but given the challenges we're facing and that we will keep on facing, we just cannot afford not to include a global citizenship education that truly means something for kids, for teachers, for parents, where they see themselves as change agents. We welcome allies and partners to continue on this mission. Whichever sector you contribute from, join us in the 2030 Club. Let's play, reflect, and take action together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Dina. Very interesting presentation, and it's good that you are sharing with us the experience, but also the results, and that there is evidence of success. I think this is very important. Magdalena, I would like to pick up something. Of course, we have heard about the 2030 Club, the learners, but obviously teachers are critical in this area, and we tend to neglect their important role. And in some cases, we think that the technology will take over the role of teachers, which is obviously a big mistake. Teachers have a very critical role in advancing education, the right to education, and obviously SDGs and more broadly. From the experience you are having, how the role of teachers has changed in using content and pedagogies to make the link between curriculum and the SDGs. What you have done with teachers, how you see the role of teachers in this context. Please, Magdalena.
Thank you. In ProFuturo, we strongly believe on the role of teachers to transform education. There is a need to adapt education systems to the 21st century, and that means that not only the contents of education need to be adapted, but also the way they are transmitted. Having said so, the role of teachers as promoters of the SDGs is vital. They are the ones in charge of including these concepts into the classroom. But in general terms, old-fashioned education methodologies do not work in the era we live in when trying to raise awareness about sustainable development. We need to provide teachers with skills and methodologies that help children fully understand their meaning and importance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dina, maybe back to you also. How you prepare teachers to play this role in the club and to engage in this very active pedagogies and game and play approaches? How you prepare teachers to change a bit the sense that maybe they usually have?
Thank you so much, Maureen. We actually live the experience with them. So they are firsthand understanding, incorporating, playing the games that they will then facilitate with their students. So this is a key aspect of the success, for them to enjoy, to understand, and to see how useful this will be. It's critical. And this happens during the training. So we have a very close connection with the teachers and understand also their feedback, their ideas, their questions, and their experiences so that we can make it better coming forward.
Great. And I see also that in the chat, our colleagues are putting some resources related to the competence framework for teaching the 21st century that was published by ProFuturo, I see. And thanks to Magdalena and her colleagues to have resources in English and Spanish and French. And I'm sure we will have other UN languages as well. So congratulations for that. We really would like to have a diversified resources in different languages and contextualize it to the different countries and needs. Magdalena, maybe a last very short question. So the 2030 Club, what are the plans for the expansion? You have been a key player in the Global Education Coalition that UNESCO launched last year to respond to the COVID crisis and ensure the continuity of learning and the right to education. You are very active in different initiatives. So where the 2030 Club will go?
Well, as you know, we are present right now in 40 countries, and we intend to grow even more than that. So we intend to deploy this new content through all our project throughout the world. So the use will be huge.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I would like to just take forward the discussion we have had. I think in this segment in particular, I see that how much taking the SDGs as an important content for the curriculum, advancing the skills and the knowledge that learners can have impact and can yield result. And Dina, you have shared with us how much results can be achieved at different layers. I feel that also the teacher's role is very critical here, and obviously they are agent of change. They can be agent of accompanying their learners and the communities where they are living and acting. Probably what we would like to see, and we started the discussion today with the role of the states and the role of the education system as a whole, how to accompany these initiatives so that they are they don't remain at local level, but they can be taken at system level. If I can ask colleagues to mute their mic, please. Let me, I think we had very interesting segments today. We started, first of all, with an international perspective. And thanks again for the Danish government and the Institute to advance this pledge for sustainable recovery and reaffirming the importance of the human rights in this perspective. We started with that, but we moved also to the first segment that reaffirmed the role of states in achieving those rights and what are the impact on the policies, on the budget and on action that have to be taken at state level. And we have heard examples from Costa Rica and from other countries. So from an international, from a multilateral, we move to a national perspective and national policies. But we also heard from Halima and her colleagues and the panel how much is important to mobilize and to act for advocacy, to mobilize civil society, and particularly to act also with media. And we have heard from Irene and Sakina how much is important to leverage the media for advocacy. And we have heard also how the SMART tool that was developed can advance and can have impact on budget, on policy, and in some cases also on visibility, for example, through the media. In the last part of the discussion, we have heard also about the importance of education, the importance of citizens, and how we build the human capabilities to advance the human right sustainable recovery. And we have heard about the 2030 Club, how it can impact the situation on the ground, how it can reinforce the agency of learners, but also the agency of teachers. And I believe this is something that we shouldn't forget. What Magdalena and Dina was telling us is that education is an enabler for other SDGs. It's an SDG but it's also an enabler for other SDGs, because we are building capabilities of people, and that's what we want, is a right-based recovery and a human-centered recovery. I really would like to thank all my colleagues, Birgit, Halima, Magdalena and Dina, Irene, Sakina, and other colleagues also who participated in this discussion today. Thanks to Ambassador for his opening notes and for setting the scene for our discussion. Thanks to the Institute for Human Rights and in Denmark and the important role that they are playing. Also, thanks to all colleagues who have been sharing in the chat resources that are really very important for all of us in different languages, and they are very informative. They are very important for all of us. Don't hesitate to reach out to our speakers and our interveners today. Leverage the resources that are available, and please get engaged. Join the pledge. It's still open. It's a pledge that can mobilize member states, but also civil society. Join the pledge. That's how we can advance this human rights perspective that I'm sure we are all acting for today. Thank you again. Thanks to all the participants. We had more than 220 participants in the peak of our discussion, and I wish you all the best. Merci. Hasta luego. Bye.
Gracias.
Bye.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Sí.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.